Hi, morning everyone. We are not going to start straight away. The room is still filling up. So if you give us just a minute or a minute and a half, we'll do introductions and we'll get underway. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. We're looking forward to a productive conversation. And we'll get started in just a second. Okay, the numbers seem to have stabilized. So good morning. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you with us for this webinar. I'm your host for today's session. My name is Guy Krieger. I'm a risk consultant with ESCROWSURE. Assisting me today with the technology and various other inputs in this webinar is my colleague, Anthony Watson, who's also a risk consultant with ESCROWSURE.
Thanks for the introduction, Guy. Lovely being here with you and Katlego, and thank you to everyone attending.
Great, and thanks for everything you've done to make this work technologically. So today, everyone, you join us for our second webinar in a series which is focused on the Joint Standard for IT Governance and Risk Management, which is an updated set of regulations which comes into effect really soon. 15th of November is the effective date. Our previous webinar on the subject a couple of weeks back was in partnership with Michelson's Giles Attorneys, where we talked to legal and governance expert attorney Sicelo Kula. And today our guest is Katlego Masemola, CEO of consulting firm Orion Cyber. Thanks so much for making time to be with us today, Katlego. Why don't you tell us a little more about yourself and your journey to the point at which you're being interviewed as an expert in the field of IT governance and risk management?
Yeah, thanks, Guy and Anthony. I think welcome to everyone that's in attendance. Yeah, my name is Katlego Masemola. I think most of you will know me from my days on the SACA, big advocate for assurance and trust relationships. So I run Orion Cyber, which is an assurance advisory and a training firm with about 15 years in. We do all assurance work around IT, and the joint standard, I think, talks to one of the key topics that we are always auditing in, and also system management just develop frameworks in. So this is just one of the things that we do. I think additionally, we do trainings. So we do all leading certifications. So if you look at your CISA, your CISM, the MITRE framework, and also some of the ethical hackings on the EC Council side, we are accredited providers in those spaces. So yeah, I think that's just a bit about myself. Thank you and welcome.
Great, thanks for that. We look forward to diving deeper into your knowledge concerning this area. And friends, we want this webinar to be informative, but also interactive and engaging. And so we've got a number of polls which the audience can participate in. Just to emphasize, these polls are anonymous. So whatever you vote, we won't know who's voting in what way. So you can be completely feel free to just express yourselves in the poll. One more item is that our chat will be open for a couple more minutes and then closed for the duration of the webinar. If you have questions, please pop them in the Q&A. And before we launch our first poll, Anthony's going to take a second just to explain how the polling and the Q&A system works.
Thank you, Guy. Can you just confirm that you can see my screen? It says, please scan the QR code to join the poll.
Got it.
Fantastic. So it's a fairly simple process. Please take out your cell phone camera and scan the QR code. A menti.com link will pop up and you can just hit that. It will then take you through to our polling system where you'll be able to submit your answers. If you feel you want to rather just key in menti.com on your phone, you can do so and then enter the code as displayed.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Anthony. Our first poll will help us understand a little bit about who's in the room with us today, starting with the organizations represented. So please tell us something about the size of the organization that you are working for. In the poll, it'll give you various options. Please click an option and click submit, and then the results will come up on the screen and it'll take us through them.
Fantastic. We seem to be getting a lot of thumbs up. So it looks like it's all working very well. So let's kick through. That seems to be working nicely. Guy, let me put on a 10-second timer for the last submissions.
Perfect. Just 5 seconds left to submit your response. Thanks so much for your engagement. Looking really great. It's quite appropriate that we're voting on this day. I guess the American elections are, the voting is pretty much done. So we're aligned with what's happening out there. What a fascinating response. There's almost uniformity across all sizes of organization.
It looks like a pizza, doesn't it? Somebody commented, amazing. Thank you so much. So we can see here that on 18 percentile, we've got SMEs 11 to 50 employees, whereas second best, we have 1 to 10. So maybe this is independent consultants that are here that want to learn a little bit more about the joint standard. And last but not least, on 14, the larger corporates representing here today.
Excellent. Thank you so much for engaging on that poll. Now, for our second poll, it's going to tell us a little more about the actual people involved in the webinar and your role in the company's journey towards compliance. So why don't you have a look at the second poll and just tell us something about your role?
Is it piano now? From pizza to piano.
And it's alive. It changes and moves and shapes.
Oh, it's doing well.
But the overwhelming weight is with governance and risk.
There we go. I see we've got some internal auditors here as well as head finance and business development, and some thumbs up as well. Really loving this engagement.
Yes, absolutely fantastic. Really appreciate the audience being involved. This webinar is aimed at a slightly more practical approach to compliance. And so I'd like to bring in Katlego here with a perspective before the next poll. Katlego, with your exposure to the breadth of financial services, how do you rate the levels of awareness of the joint standard and its requirements within the entities that you have had exposure to?
Yeah, thanks for that. Look, I think for the larger corporates, where there's more organization, there has been good exposure, and I think, look, the various structures which we are seeing here, they've really just come up in terms of knowing what to do and maybe kicking off just in time. Because if you look at the standard, it starts off, I think, in 2021 from initial draft. So all of the way from that draft up to where we are today, I think for larger corporate, it's been really, there has been a positive response to the market because they understand the implication that this will have on the organizations. So I think it's been quite well responded to from the engagements that we've been having.
And ultimately, the joint standard is directed towards those in financial services, isn't it?
Yeah. So anything financial service, if you look at the Act, anyone in financial services for any type of product, they are impacted by the standards, and they do need to be the ones that then implement and ensure that it's in place for the organization. So that's quite key. And what they've done, which is very good, they're looking at setting the tone from the top. So at the beginning, when you start to read the standard, they bind the board immediately, just in terms of the responsibility to say that the board is ultimately responsible. So we know that those that have not started, they are trying to get their bosses in trouble,
Excellent. Anthony, I see you've already started the next poll to do with awareness. Really interesting, the results there. Why don't you take us through them quickly?
Thanks, guys. So it's really interesting to know that the majority of participants today, out of the 56 that have answered, do not know much about the IT joint standard for governance and risk management. And then it is good to know at 32% that we do have participants that are very aware and informed. And then there's always room for learning and for growth, and that's the last one here on 31%.
Once again, thank you very much for your engagement. As the go-live date for this joint standard draws closer, we're seeing an increase in the number of inquiries motivated by the deadline, requesting advice and services. But before we dive into the specifics, Katlego, perhaps you can help our listeners with a little bit more of a general overview of the joint standard and how you specifically assist with compliance.
All right. Yeah. So I think if you look at the standards, traditionally we would have our various policies within our organization, frameworks, procedures. So the standard, what they really aim to do is to set the practice, the minimum practices, set requirements that are expected in any organization that is operating in the financial services sector. It's coming all the way from your FSCA and also your South African Reserve Bank, which means that those are the regulating entities. So it becomes quite important that we understand and try to read up in terms of what is the expectation that they have, especially on our IT department. So they state categorically that senior management within IT should be working with the board just in terms of setting out these standards and ensuring that they are then in place. So, and that's primarily the requirement in terms of this current set. There are other sets that are coming through, but just from focused conversation, this one, they are totally focusing on just IT governance and risk. And I think the other thing to your latter question, so in terms of my involvement, really, as a trust and assurance company, our focus mainly, we get called in by organizations who say, look, there is this particular requirement and how do we make sure that we meet it? And we then sit with the organization and draft a clear plan and say, this is how we'll get through to the requirement so that then you do not get found wanting. So I think that's our level of involvement. In, I think, paragraph 14, it's more us, the assurance side,
Yeah, I'd
Thanks.
imagine that part of your process would be an audit of the current documentation related to IT governance and resilience, and then to see where the gaps are to update to align with the latest joint standard.
Yeah, so I think when we talk to these organizations, our initial start, more than anything, we just start in terms of just understanding the stakeholders within the organization. Because if you look at all the requirements in the whether you're talking risk, compliance, resilience projects, there are a number of key stakeholders, both internal and even external, right? So for us, our conversation, it really starts with just having understanding the stakeholders. And then once we've done that, then we then assess the current document set that is in place. So this means that we'll ask for your IT strategy, which is a requirement in there. We'll ask for all your commitments to the board, all your standards, all the frameworks that you have. If you adopted any particular framework, such as your corporates, we'll just try and get that as a grasp, and then we'll map in line with your compliance strategy or framework. We'll then try to map and assess to say, what are the current gaps? And we'll sit with management, just agree in terms of the gaps that we are identifying, and then we take it forward from there.
Perfect. I think that was a very helpful, practical response there to give people something of a roadmap towards compliance and how consultants go about assisting corporates with compliance. The go live date really 15th of November, it's just around the corner. So how close are we to full compliance? Katlego, to what degree do you feel our financial services are ready to comply come the mid-November deadline?
Yeah, I think it will be hard to really say, but I think for most of the your big banks, your insurance, I know the level of compliance. These guys have been working on this thing for over a year now, so there is a good degree of compliance work that is being done in the background. I think moreover, the smaller organizations might be the ones that might still be challenged, but I think there's good room and accelerations that we can do, so that then by the 15th of November, then we are still able to ensure that there is some level of plan in place, in case then the authorities then ask or come, So that level of detail, I think it will really then assist the other parties.
Excellent. Well, let's ask the room about compliance readiness in our next poll. Let's give everyone an opportunity just to say, how are you doing? How ready are you in terms of compliance?
There we go.
People
Looks
were
like
very
the bar
quick
charts
on
are
the
climbing.
buzzers there. Excellent. There's still some responses coming in.
And some fire emojis. It's good.
I'm not sure what a fire emoji means in this context.
They're feeling
I'll
ready.
explain immediately after this.
Okay, let me put that timer on, guys, just so that we've got.
Thank you.
We've got
Great.
10
Just
more
a couple more seconds to click your response. Please let us know how you're feeling.
There we go.
Well, I think the results have pretty much stabilized, and so, well, a last few mentioning that they are somewhat ready, and I think that's pretty much in line with what we would have expected, because compliance is a continuum. And one can never be, well, there's just a few people who feel absolutely ready to comply, and that's wonderful. But I think the bulk of us are feeling, well, we think we've done what we need to do. We're not absolutely sure, but we've engaged, and there are even some, thank you, Anton, who are exempt from compliance with this. Very interesting. Excellent. Thanks once again for your engagement in our poll. Why don't you let us know what your compliance strategy is? Every organization will have a strategy. Are you aiming for absolute compliance? Are you just responding to certain risks within your environment? Are you aiming just to cover the very minimum required by the Prudential Authority and the Financial Services Conduct Authority? Or have you got no strategy at all? One more poll, and then we'll chat a little bit more through the results of that next poll. What is your compliance strategy?
There we go. It's good to see that a risk-based approach has been adopted at 79%. That's good to know.
Yeah.
I'd imagine the 10% that are sitting in the absolute compliance are in an area of our economy that are highly, highly regulated and policed by the Prudential Authority or the Financial Services Conduct Authority, and having to report and respond on their compliance performance frequently.
Fantastic. We've got 52 submissions. I will just put that last timer on there. 10 seconds to respond.
Really interesting that we don't have anybody who's aiming for minimum compliance. That's such a good indicator for our industry that everybody is trying to do what they can to level up for this particular regulatory requirement. Katlego, what advice would you have for people concerning compliance readiness, sort of small, medium, and large enterprises? How would you, where would they kick off in terms of their approach to compliance readiness?
Yeah, and I think if you look at the number of requirements that are in the document, they're not new, right? So whether your strategy, the resilience, the business continuity side, or IT projects, they are just more organized. But if you look at any organization, they would naturally have some of those items already in. And I think from a compliance point, if you are running a strong enterprise risk management framework, then there should be a question that then says, how do we ensure that we meet our legislative requirements? Right, whether it's these standards that are coming out or specific acts that are coming out. So that conversation would then help you in terms of just starting off. I think compliance itself, it's cuts across many areas within the organization. So it's quite key for us to understand who are the role players within our particular organization, right? And that's a good starting point. Right, and what is management support of all of these efforts? Is management aware? So one of the key things that you must do as soon as such things come out is to notify management of the requirement, and management all the way to the board, right? And because of the literal implications that the standards then have, because it will hold them accountable, right? And if you look at IT is not naturally a compliance driven team, right? So it's quite important that within your ICT, if you do have an IT governance or a compliance office or a risk management office, then it's quite important that they then start to drive and collate and coordinate all of these efforts across the organization. So identifying everyone who will have a role to play, because it's not going to just be IT, right? There is risk management, there is compliance, which is both are outside IT, but they have a requirement in order to report, right? Risk management must know how are we doing in terms of the compliance requirements that are out. So ICT, whoever will be driving from ICT must have those good engagements and also overall involvement of the team. So within a function, let it not just be this one person driving this compliance. It can be spearheaded by that, but then it's important to just involve the overall team. Because if you look at projects, which is part of program and projects are part of this, they are also highlighted in there. And normally those are the guys that will normally go on some agile methodology, be busy doing projects and other activities, not really involved in any level of organizational requirements or anything. So it's quite important to then just involve the team. Management buy-in is also quite important. And in terms of management buy-in, once you have that, you can then develop a clear strategy that will easily say, this is our universe in terms of compliance, and this is all the stakeholders that should be involved. Then you can get from the top and then you bring it down, right? A gap self-assessment, I recommend that a lot, because the requirements are very specific, right? And in terms of them being specific, it then helps you to say, do I have this or do I not have this? Is my function for assurance, as an example, or for resilience, is it capacitated? If not capacitated, then you know what you should be doing, right? Because those are some of the things they speak about, to say there must be capacity to evaluate. If you don't have capacity and you know you don't have, and this is why then other organizations will then reach out and say, come and help us. Even if you develop a toolkit that then helps you to self-assess, it's important. If the authorities then ask, you say, I'm on this plan, which is then helping me in this manner. But you must make sure that there is clear deadlines and dates that then help you to meet the requirements as published. Right. So
Excellent.
that's a high level of
very helpful.
Compliance.
Very helpful, Katlego. And in an offline conversation, I remember you saying to me, keep in mind, this is not an IT issue. This is a governance issue, which impacts the governing body. And just as you've pointed out, requires a wide range of stakeholders' involvement, not just IT people. And it should not be left to IT people and forced upon IT people. Because the ultimate responsibility for compliance is with the governing body, with the board. We were contacted recently by a director in a local head office of an international firm, and they were really concerned about certain issues of compliance reflecting on them and exposing them to personal liability. Is that something that you've seen before in terms of regulations, Katlego?
Yeah, and I think quite true. It's not an IT issue, and that's what we must understand, right? Governance is driven at a different level. So as operational guys, we must not then let it be or limit it because of how it is named and coined in terms of the responsibilities. It is an overall organizational governance issue, and if you are at a board level, this is something that you must then make them aware of. So it becomes quite key for organizations to fully understand the implications. So if you look at your director liability, you are literally then implicating the board by not taking specific actions, just in terms of the definition, right? And this is what then, if you look at the King's Code, this is what they speak about just around the liability, and also your Companies Act and all these other related acts. So it becomes quite important that there is that level of awareness, and even understanding that in terms of liability, then the board will be held fully responsible for taking actions or not taking actions in this instance. So it becomes very important that we play our role, we notify, or we say this is what we're doing, and so that then the board is protected.
Great. Now, I imagine that in your engagement with various different entities, you've seen certain challenges, either in getting started or in progressing with the compliance journey, what do you feel would be the biggest challenges facing an organization in terms of approaching a compliance tick in the box?
Yeah, I think the overall coordination remains one of the key factors within this, because naturally, because of how it is named and termed, so one would really just think it's IT, but then IT in this instance is required to then engage all these other role players, right? And it becomes important that that conversation is happening at the right level. So is it driven by CIO understanding their requirements, or is there a governance champion within the organization and understanding the implication and the requirements? So the coordination becomes very important. Also the overall mapping. So if you look at the mapping, what I mean essentially is that you have to pull a bunch of other documents and frameworks and policies and have the understanding across all of them to say, this is what this one means, right? So if you're pulling your IT governance framework as an example, you must understand, does it cover the legislative requirements and how those legislative requirements must be met each time, right? And then does it talk about ensuring this level of compliance as and when a standard comes through? How does your IT governance framework respond to it, right? So then you then have to do detailed mapping. So you might take your different policies that play part and then say, if you have a project management one as an example, you then need to look at that project management one and look at the requirements here and do a one-to-one mapping, both forward mapping, where we then say, this is what the standard requires and this is what we have, so that you identify the gap, and even reverse mapping to say, this is what we have and this is what is required from the standard, and then measure the level of impact that you have on the organization. So you might find you're at a specific impact, you are not highly impacted, maybe you were more mature as an organization, but for smaller organizations or for growing organizations, it then might mean that you have a lot of activities that you need to cover in terms of just the assessment yourself, because it's a number of policies from different areas, and then also then what do you do then after that, after you found those gaps, right? How do you build them up and ensure that you are well covered in terms of the gaps to address what is required in terms of the standards?
Great. I think that this conversation is taking on a very nice practical flavor, and that's exactly what we wanted. But let's see whether we can engage our audience again on the challenges that you have faced in complying. Just looking at our polls, it's clear that most of our audience are well down the road towards compliance, and so it'll be interesting to see what have been the stumbling blocks, what have been the difficulties involved in your compliance journey. So Ant will stick up the next poll for us, and let's see what we can learn about everyone's journey to compliance.
Thanks, Guy. This is a little bit thought more attached to it. So I'm just going to put a 30-second timer there for everybody to respond, and then we can see what the results are.
Perfect. Thanks, Ant.
Okay, responding is off. We only had 34, so let me just put responding back on for those that did not submit.
Let's give it another few seconds.
Thank you for that like.
No fire.
Oh, there's the fire.
There you go.
All right, it looks
That
like
is
everybody.
Yeah, you can go.
Yeah, it looks like everybody has submitted. Thank you so much. We've got, funnily enough, 26% on AI governance considerations, with 21% on governing our contracts with vendors, especially third-party vendors, and 18% on leadership from our governing body, as well as a little 18 down here, adherence to third-party risk. We've got a tiebreaker, and third-party risk management is essential with this joint standard, Guy.
Really interesting how AI has shot to prominence in the last while, and certainly the regulation of AI is a very interesting field that we'll do a webinar on in sometime early next year. But it's interesting that our friends in the webinar are already grappling with how it is that they are going to achieve compliance in that area. Katlego, in your experience, what part of the joint standard do you think has been the most challenging to get right?
Yeah, and I think if you look at the responses that we received, the AI quite important, right? And I just want to talk about it just briefly because of how immature we are as a whole continent or citizen, right? South Africa, Africa, but also the rest of the world. Even the regulations that are coming out, they are quite new. So I fully align with those, with whoever's is responding there, and also the ones on third party and overall vendor management, quite important, quite reflective, right? Because part of this, if you look at it well, you do have to review some of the vendor contracts that you have currently. So it becomes quite a big task, and just review it, insert specific information or requirements in the agreement. So it becomes quite key. I think from our side, overall notification requirement, quite important for us and for the organization. And if you look at the standard that is out, they say it must be done in a manner that aligns or is predetermined by the authorities. So it's quite important that you have a clear strategy or framework in terms of the various notifications if they have to happen, right? Assurance, naturally, I think it's inherent. It's an inherent bias on my side. But then, in terms of assurance, all that they want is that we ensure that we have the right capacity to review all of these areas that they are being promulgated, right? Including these emerging technologies that they are speaking of, but also including overall governance, right? So in terms of the governance, are we touching on things like these standards? So your internal audit teams should have already raised their hand and said, this is the amount of work we can do this standard, and this is what it implies, as an advisory, right? Also then, if you look at 13 talks resilience, right? In terms of resilience and continuity, as a country and also globally, we've all been grappling with continuity, especially because of the number of hackings or cybersecurity risks that have been happening. So it becomes quite important that we have a clear response in terms of continuity. A lot of the times what we've seen, I think even from vendor management and third-party management, we talk even escrow. I know you guys are this is what you guys focus on, but then you find in a number of instances, organizations have it on paper and on agreement, but they don't have the actual escrow, right? Which is something that one day we must just do a whole webinar on and just detail and talk about it. But overall, I think they're trying to ensure that the CIA triad is covered terms of confidentiality, integrity, and the availability component. And it becomes quite key for organization to then understand their responsibility. There was also a couple of people that responded on the protection of data. So if you look at this current set of standards, they have a whole section that's dedicated to handling of sensitive information, and that has a direct effect on POPI and your compliance towards POPI, and how then this must then be done. So if you have, and this is just additional, so if you have framework like DAMA, and it's one of your frameworks in the organization, it then becomes quite DAMA DMBOK. It becomes quite important that you notice the change that is happening in terms of their latest framework, where then they are saying data handling ethics, right? That is quite key, that you understand, to say, even from a protection of personal information, we then need to even talk about the ethics of how that entire data is then being handled. So those are some of the areas that we've really seen, and some of the organizations that we talk to are grappling with how do we get it off the line and ensure that this is then being done, right? I think, because at the end, some of these functions are still just IT functions, so they need to still say, how do we do the actual IT work, you know? So, but we are able to really support and see how we move through. Thanks.
Perfect, thank you. You mentioned our involvement, and certainly Article 12 and 13 refer to IT resilience and business continuity, and that's where software escrow plays a role in securing the integrity. Article 12 talks about protecting the integrity of source code and the relevant documentation. And Article 13, I'm reading straight from the joint standard, establish a sound IT resilience management process. So software escrow plays directly into that environment. I understand that the time is ticking on, and so I want to just see if we can begin to wrap this up for people so that we can not take up too much of your day. But just before we continue, let's do one more poll number 7, and just understand who would be responsible for compliance in your particular environment. Who has the responsibility to deliver compliance? Katlego mentioned a phrase earlier, the governance champion or the compliance champion. Who's the compliance champion in your environment? Let's do that poll quickly and learn something a little more about the organizations that we are talking to.
Sure, Guy, a lot of snooker shots towards compliance officer and governance manager.
Yeah, it's not my problem.
Exactly. His desk is getting busy, or her desk is getting busy before. Well, there's just more and more and more little blue dots going towards that fella.
See why I left compliance.
Yes. Yep. I think those blue dots reflect workflow also, and busyness. While we're seeing that result take shape, Anthony, are you seeing anything in the Q&A? We've just maybe got a minute that we can do something in the Q&A before we wrap up.
I've got a question here, Guy, just asking if this session will be recorded. It will be recorded, and we will publish the link to all attendees shortly hereafter. If anybody else has any more questions, please do post it in the Q&A, and we can see if we can answer that in good time as well.
Yep. So I think we will keep that open just for another minute or so. If you have something you'd like us to respond to, please drop it in the Q&A. before we wrap up? Anything coming through, Ant?
No, nothing yet.
All right.
Let's see.
Well,
Here we go. Here we go. Sorry. Now people are getting trigger happy. They're saying someone mentioned they have compliance exemption. How does that work?
I happen to know who that is, and I think the short answer is they're not within financial services. They are in a very specific industry. I don't want to disclose exactly who that is and what industry that is, but it's something quite unique and niched. And so that may be the reason why they are specifically exempt from compliance in this particular area. Just to reiterate that the joint standard, while it's generally best practice, it also relates specifically in terms of actual enforceable compliance to the broader financial services. Is that correct, Katlego?
Yeah. So financial services and financial services just in terms of the Act, and I think the Act is very clear. Anything where then you're offering financial products, financial technology services, e-wallet, right? Anything that is financial, essentially, those are the guys that need to comply to this particular joint standard. So insurance, your banks, investment companies, right? Asset managers, quite important because they are normally in a corner somewhere saying we are just holding the money, but those are some of the guys that need to ensure compliance.
That's good. I see here one last one just asking, is there a difference between large enterprises versus small companies with less than 50 employees? A different joint standard, but I think you've answered that there, Katlego.
Yeah, there is no difference. I think the difference will really just be your response and your ability to respond. But the expectation is that if you are operating within that Act in definition, then it then becomes important that you comply fully.
Fantastic.
I think I have seen a mild softening of that from the SARB, just saying that the actual enforcement may be slightly more lenient towards very small enterprises who don't necessarily have the resources available for full compliance. We're going to wrap it there. Our profound thanks to Katlego Masemola, CEO of Orion Cyber. Katlego, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, so I'm very active on LinkedIn. This is where normally I annoy people with posts. But overall, I think we are based in Sandton, in Illovo. My information, I think maybe we can just share in this post. But we are Gauteng based, and doing most of the work, I think, in both public and private sector. So we are just keen to collaborate and just have conversations with people and see how best we build that trust relationship. Thanks.
Excellent. We really appreciate your expertise on the show today. And if you'd like to contact Anthony or I for more information concerning software risk or compliance with specifically Clause 13 using software escrow arrangements, please reach out to us on LinkedIn or have a look at escrowsure.co.za. If you just Google ESCROWSURE, we'll come up straight away. And we offer a free consultation and risk assessment during the next couple of weeks. So please feel free to reach out to us. We wish you a wonderful afternoon. Thanks so much for sharing part of your morning with us, and have a great, great, great day. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.